Yes, hello and welcome to our 5th BirchTalk this year. The advertising industry is our topic today, because we believe that a shift in perspective is needed. The advertising industry is responsible for 4 to 6% of climate-damaging emissions worldwide, especially digital advertising, which is, of course, a lot, 2001. And that is why it is essential to talk about how advertising can become more sustainable. However, we have noticed, and I believe the audience has as well, that the noticeable fatigue regarding the topic of sustainability and climate protection is also affecting the advertising industry. I personally find that very concerning, not only in light of the images from La Valencia, and generally there is quite a lot happening worldwide right now. Therefore, I am very pleased today to welcome our 2 experts who want to shed light on the topic from a different angle. They want to talk about climate responsibility instead of sustainability, explain why a change in perspective is needed in the advertising industry. And they promised me that they would not hold back. Therefore, I am very pleased to welcome the co-founder and managing director of PYURE and our CEO of UBIRCH, Stephan Noller. Welcome.
Hello, good morning. Good morning.
With over 15 years of experience in the media and edtech industry, including as CEO of Mathadvertise, you are a true expert. I believe that can be stated like this. And with the founding of PYURE this year, you have also placed a clear emphasis on sustainable advertising solutions. And Stephan, as a serial entrepreneur, and from companies like the learning computer Calliope to the edtech specialist Nugget, and until recently 2001 to UBIRCH, the specialist for ESG, data solutions, you really bring a very unique perspective, but also a lot of experience in the advertising industry, and are also well acquainted with the latest developments around CSRD and Co. With UBIRCH's new focus on ESG data exchange. And I would like to start with a question for both of you. How do you really assess this fatigue and the status of sustainability in the industry? What are you experiencing in practice? Is it really the case that fatigue is occurring? Has the topic become more important? What is your status or your assessment? And Stephan, I would also like to ask you to talk a bit about the current status of CSRD, because quite a lot has happened recently. Perhaps less has happened than should have when looking at Germany. But yes, just a bit of a state of the art. What is sustainability in the advertising industry actually? What's going on there? And yes, what developments do people in the industry need to deal with?
Cosima, thank you very much for the invitation to your BirchTalk. I hope we will have more joint episodes in the future with other common guests as well. And you are indeed actually hitting a nerve with me, because we certainly cannot sugarcoat the topic of climate change. It's about somehow setting boundaries so that climate change doesn't give us wet feet in Schleswig-Holstein and further south within the next 20 to 30 years. Keyword, global warming and ice melting. But I also understand everyone who is tired of this pressure of sustainability or the omnipresence of the topic, especially in the media and particularly in the advertising industry, as a noble goal. And for me, it is actually a double-edged sword. A, because we should not let it get close, but B, the implementation paths are not necessarily very transparent, partly coming through legal levers that leave little room for voluntariness, partly thousand. And generally, there is also a communication issue in this context, because we talk, and I am diving directly into the topic of fatigue, about a supposed connection between sustainability and renunciation. This means that it is a thought pattern that has solidified not only in the advertising industry, but generally. I would say it has shaped society since 2001, that sustainability means renunciation. And the wonderful thing about the transformation towards sustainability, meaning an overall economy that focuses on sustainability, on circular economy, and resource-efficient use, is that it actually becomes an absolute economic factor, a pro factor, because sustainable products may be more expensive, They can definitely be purchased with a better conscience, and a change in thinking among consumers has been happening for a long time anyway. However, everything must be affordable. In this respect, I believe it is a communicative or communication problem to start from exactly this paradigm. Sustainability equals renunciation. I like to illustrate it with an example from the advertising industry. Especially in the digital advertising sector, we can understand this shift towards sustainability, which primarily means creating transparency and understanding where energy consumption occurs. We can only achieve this if we operate in a continuously growing, flourishing market environment. If we are in a regressive or struggling market environment, this transformation cannot take place effectively. In this respect, we at PYURE fundamentally stand for a paradigm shift in this context and say that we need sustainability and we need growth. And both go hand in hand through efficiency improvements, through the use of technologies that specifically address this, possibly also through the use of artificial intelligence. You at UBIRCH, I believe, have direct connections to the use of AI and are much more oriented towards the winning side, the opportunities of this transformation. So much. To be honest, from me, on this topic of perspective and paradigm, I also notice the fatigue because the topic is sometimes communicated very harshly and strictly, but little about possibilities and opportunities. Or Stephan, how do you see it? I mean, you also have a clear position on this.
Yes, exactly. That's why it was important to me to address the topic straightforwardly in 2021, because I believe it makes no sense to deny that this fatigue exists. A few days ago, I made a small video about sustainable products in the frozen food aisle and went into my supermarket because I knew that Forster is a pioneer, as is often the case, and prints the carbon footprint of frozen meals on the front of their packaging. I just wanted to get them for my video. And then I went into the supermarket, got them, but couldn't find them anymore. It was no longer on the front, it's now on the back. And that actually tells this story that many, including us, thought that sustainability would be somewhat of a self-starter. All the climate-motivated people, the advertising industry is typically a bit more of a front-runner, always following trends, a bit more progressive, perhaps more left-leaning, somehow more enlightened, and so on. Then I think many of us believed, and I include myself in this, that it would somehow be a self-sustaining trend that wouldn't go away. And then there were also the legal requirements, which are all becoming stricter, new ones coming in, and so on. And to be honest, that has not happened. What I am actually a bit frustrated about is that the advertising industry has kind of abandoned it. It has been replaced by AI and other topics, which I also find fascinating and great. But just as you said, Franzen, we cannot treat climate change as a trend. It won't go away. It will increase and worsen, and we will notice it more closely. I am sitting here in Cologne, where we are recording Cosima 2, and the Ahr Valley is only a few kilometers away from here. So we walk there in the former flood areas. That won't go away. That's why we need something for that. And I just had an image while you were talking. I thought to myself, I belong to the 1970 generation, which means I still know organic food from the organic store. Not sure if you remember. Health food store, yes. So small shriveled shops where it smells a bit strange, where you don't really know what you're getting. Everything costs 3 times as much, but it all tastes great and so on. And then I thought to myself, okay, now Aldi or Lidl, largest organic retailer in the country. And I believe hardly any farmer can afford not to do that, not to have it in their assortment. And I somewhat believe that this also needs to happen with sustainable media and advertising, that it has to go mainstream. It has to come to Aldi. So away from the health food store and towards Aldi. And that would mean in the industry that it is simply the total standard that you provide co-parameters in the media plan, that you report this to your client, that the client shops accordingly, and so on. And I actually believe that this will happen a bit delayed, a bit less with flying flags, as one might have thought. Mega, we are pioneers, great topic. The industry has always been innovative and so on. And there is now a hiccup that it is currently less hot. That cannot be denied, but it will not go away. That's why I believe that next year the topic might already be more on this path towards Aldi. Sorry for the image now. But I think I understand what I mean, that it will become the dominant product category. At Aldi, you now get more organic vegetables than non-organic. That has simply become the standard. And animal husbandry is suddenly at the top and so on. So I believe we need to go there with the media industry. And I believe that will also happen because the topic simply won't go away. It will grow, and the industry will have to do justice to this topic.
Stephan, keyword, the industry must comply. You mentioned it earlier as well, the CAD implementation law, which is also something that Passois said is moving towards obligation, and climate protection is an obligation. What is the current status there? And in particular, are there things that specifically affect the advertising industry? Yes, totally. So just give an update.
Many are not aware of this. So first, Elon Musk blew away the global sustainability standard.
Yes, the European one has been in place since 22.
I know, exactly. But still, that was quite a significant setback, so to speak, for the ongoing initiative. Totally. That had nothing to do with sustainability at all. Not at all, no. One could say it was an unfortunate construction, but still, I think it somehow fits the historical situation when you look at what role Elon Musk will have in the future. And then there is, quite soberly, I think very nicely summarized in an article by Effas, we Germans like to position ourselves as particularly good at implementing laws and sustainability and nature conservation and so on. In fact, we are the only large country in the EU that has not yet implemented the law, which actually had a timeline. By summer of this year, the CSRD should have been practically enacted into national law here. That is not the case so far. And of course, the entire government crisis in Germany makes this even more difficult. And it could actually be the case that it does not succeed in being implemented into German law by the end of the year, which would really be a disaster, that must be said clearly, because the law will certainly come. After all, it is an EU requirement. But as long as it is not technically implemented into national law, it is a so-called directive of the EU. And strictly speaking, it is not legally valid or enforceable in Germany. And this, of course, creates enormous uncertainty for the industry. For example, I think of the advertising clients in the media industry, and of course the advertising companies as well, because it is not at all clear. Until now, Francois and I have always been going around saying, look, starting in January, you will very likely be required to report under CSRD, because actually, starting in January, companies in Germany will be newly obligated to report under the new legal situation. Now, to be honest, one shouldn't say it too loudly, but it would also be nonsense not to say it. It is unclear. So currently, I think it looks more like they will not be required to report under the CSRD. And the companies that have prepared for it to happen are in a difficult position, because they have prepared for a legal situation that is not going to happen. It will, of course, come with a few months' delay. So I don't know, maybe the law will come in March or something like that. Then there is still the question of whether it will be valid retroactively or not. In any case, the federal government and the current hiccup have contributed significantly to the uncertainty in the industry. And on top of that, other things are being postponed. There are initiatives in 2021 aimed at deregulation, harmonizing certain sustainability legislation, and so on. That's all well and good in theory, but it mainly produces confusion and uncertainty. And companies that are not intrinsic pioneers like a Vaudi or something, but rather say, we will see what is legally required, will now naturally say, oh yes, then we just have to wait. And that is, of course, poison for advancing such a topic. If the big advertiser says, sorry, we don't even know if we are required to report in January or according to which standard, it's total poison. That's why I have to say that this is pure laziness on the part of those acting politically, because they have managed to get a few laws in order after the coalition broke apart. They could have easily done the same with the CSRD implementation law. So laziness might be the wrong word. Let's call it cherry picking, intentional cherry picking. And whatever federal government we will have next year, I hope that they will not handle climate protection this way, but will take the issue seriously. And that is how they should be measured, whether they can implement this law this year. It is essentially a technical act. It has already been read in the Federal Council and so on and so forth. There is no major dissent about it and also no significant leeway because of EU requirements. But not doing this now is quite shameful. One cannot say otherwise.
Thank you very much for your invitation. Sorry.
All good. Just very briefly, this political dissent we cannot influence, but we are actually talking about two areas that are somewhat decoupled from each other. First, as you rightly say, this is EU law and already existing law, even if local implementation would be a prerequisite for us in Germany. But what about internationally positioned companies, for example? For example, companies traded on the Paris Stock Exchange or other marketplaces that pursue a clear European strategy, are they then only not subject to reporting obligations in Europe? Or do they just accept it and say, in wise foresight, it will come anyway? The Germans have just sat on their hands a bit too long. We will continue to prepare everything as we have done so far. To be honest, I rather rely on the intelligence in the second mentioned category with that very foresight. Because now unwinding something that has already been prepared, adapting to materiality analyses and similar, only means even more effort, because I may later have to either remove it again or confirm it anew. In this respect, I believe that companies and corporate management differ significantly at this point from political intentions, because they are aware that it will come either this way or perhaps a little differently, and maybe not immediately, but the day after tomorrow. Ultimately, however, the whole thing has another perspective for companies. We are back in the context of growth, and that is why I believe the advertising industry is so important here as a pioneer and as an animator for its clients, who, as advertisers, actually want to get the best possible results on a communicative level. And this is based on who has already prepared, who has put compliance with the CSRD, for example, on the right track, who may have already adapted in terms of communication, product world, and so on. Those who have done this have already gained significant market advantages up to today, because what not simply go away even in the European and global context is that capital markets are already strongly affected by regulation. They will be rated worse. Companies will be rated worse if they cannot report on these non-recognizable sustainability efforts. They will face 2001 problems with underfunding the transformation, whether it is digitalization or sustainability transformation, because you first have to finance it before you can then refinance it, so to speak, through sales and the like. And this transformation financing comes from the capital market. With a worse rating, my percentage points may be twice as high as those of my competitor. In this respect, I trust the economy and also our advertising industry to have much more foresight. However, I actually go so far as to say, Stephan, that I was indeed shocked at how AI has taken over the tone this year in the bubble, in the marketing advertising bubble here in Germany, but also worldwide in terms of content. In 2001, there was almost no other topic, and sustainability was even partially rolled back. There are examples where contributions, large trade-like events, were not accepted at all, which were submitted and the like. This also shows that it is an extremely uncomfortable topic, even for the advertising industry, because no one is that far along yet, as we are also not that advanced on a technological level. One might think that anyone can read a power meter, and that is indeed what we are talking about here in our context. In the advertising industry, we are primarily talking about digital advertising and energy consumption. And we are not only talking about programmatic, because it requires so many servers for the programmatic context, but we are also talking about a 50% market share of social media. There too, gigantic energy consumption occurs. And we are talking about the fact that about 40% of the carbon footprint of an advertising campaign, regardless of the channel, is already generated on the end user side. This means that the device on which the ad is displayed, which can be 1 year old and energy efficient or already 10 years old and not as energy efficient, is offered with LTE or Wi-Fi and therefore consumes more or less power. But creating exactly this transparency, I believe, the advertising market and also the advertisers are very motivated to do so because we need the answers one way or another. Whether we need them 3 months earlier or later is almost irrelevant. And one must not forget, there is also economic power behind it in the sense that these are new processes and business models to be established, which make this transparency and this energy awareness or emissions awareness a fixed component, a solid building block within communication and advertising. And for all those, and with that I conclude this short impulse lecture, for all those who are hesitating, so to speak, and say, I will wait for the proverbial word, those who are now being cautious. Yes, so first, just take a look. I think they will very likely incur disadvantages because they will then have to stand in a long line, because they may have to pay significantly higher prices for it, because they were not the innovators and early testers and so on. That is my perception, perhaps also part of fundamental beliefs. But I trust our advertising bubble, the advertising market, much more than what currently shines or seems to us from the political level.
2 brief comments on this. Franz Manon, who protect that. First, you said that electricity consumption is completely correct. The entire emissions in this industry result from electricity consumption. And I find it interesting because my thesis with Aldi, with the Aldi path, electricity also costs money. We have also strongly noticed in Germany over the last 2 years that this can suddenly be a significant cost factor. This means that sustainable advertising, which consumes fewer resources, that is less electricity, is simply cheaper. We will also have to make this argument in the coming months, that it is also about having less money, lower costs in the delivery of advertising. And the other point I wanted to briefly emphasize, because you mentioned banks and so on, is that for another industry, we are currently building an interface to banks where the banks can automatically pull sustainability data from our system when granting a loan, a business loan, and this is fully automated in the assessment of credit risk and the rating, because banks have had the obligation to do this for much longer. This indeed shows how challenging it will be. Just as you said, if a company does not engage in sustainable advertising, it will worsen the rating. It will simply become more expensive to raise money, some loans you wouldn't even get, and so on and so forth. This will simply be a hard economic factor, both in terms of electricity costs, the rating, the audit under the annual report, and so on. So we don't have the chance to do this just because we think Robert Habeck is great or something, but there are a whole range of much harder economic and regulatory reasons why it simply has to happen. Whether we are in a bad mood right now or think this is not the hottest issue on the planet, even though it actually is, it doesn't matter. It simply has to happen.
Tell me, you have Usand or you, Cosima and Stephan, I believe you have a pretty good overview of what industries emit in terms of rough emission volumes per year in the GHG, in the greenhouse gas context. We are currently arguing with a global emissions share from advertising, digital advertising, between 4 and 6%. Cosima mentioned it in the introduction. Because the market, because this structure is still so opaque when it comes to energy accounting, but the first estimates from large consulting firms are there. What about 4 to 6% comparison with other industries? Where do we stand there? Can we visualize that a bit or make it a bit more tangible? Where does the logistics sector stand worldwide?
Well, I don't have the numbers at hand right now, but I would like to say 2 things about it. On the one hand, domestic air traffic in Germany is said to be about 2%. So that's already a comparison. And then there is the advertising industry. Of course, there are buildings and energy production and so on, which contribute significantly more. But there is also a very interesting consideration in the advertising industry, namely the so-called advertised emissions. And there is a study that we can gladly link later for the British advertising market, which has chosen to use totally CSRD compliant or greenhouse gas protocol compliant considerations, stating that the indirect effects must also be included in terms of emissions. That means if I advertise SUVs and ensure that there are more and more SUVs, then I have to account for a part of the SUV emissions as a media company. And if you do that and extrapolate it for the British market, then an incredible result comes out, namely that about 30% of additional CO emissions are caused by the media industry.
So if the increased sales are due to advertising,
that's insane. You really have to consider 100 million tons of CO in the UK, 130 million tons because of the advertising industry. And then you also see how large the lever of control is. It's not just about, as you said in programmatic, whether I somehow have one less server and so on. It's also about what we are advertising for. Which content environments are being created, which are being pushed, which may not be pushed as much anymore, and so on. Which new portals? Axel Springer just announced that they have formed a new group, 2001, all such things. What are they doing? What topics are they covering? And so on and so forth. This has an impact on emissions, and with these, 30%. If you take that seriously, there is a technical discussion that could be held for a long time about whether to choose this approach or not. But you can choose it, then you are at the total top emission shares. So 30% is from transportation, energy production. These huge blocks are in that area. Then you are among the very large emitters.
Logistics actually only has 5.5. This is actually according to studies comparable, which I honestly did not think before. I thought logistics had a much larger share than advertising. And if you then factor in the indirect factor, advertising would actually be back in front. But maybe again, because we have already talked a bit about what one should actually do, what is perhaps already being done. There are already efforts, now independent of the CSRD, and also the uncertainty that arises from it and the reporting obligations. But at the beginning, during the preparation, we talked a bit about AdNet Zero and IAB-Calculator and so on. What is the state of the art in sustainability in the industry? What positive things are there to report? Because I think, especially when we talk about responsibility or climate responsibility, it is also nice or important to observe, to highlight what already exists, and what one might also use as a bit of orientation in the advertising industry if one wants to push the topic of sustainability.
Good that you ask. In fact, Stephan hinted at this earlier. The advertising industry not only sees itself, but is also necessarily in a pioneering or role model position and has taken up the topic early on, even without legislative amendments. And there have long been specialists who are also working in this area with various solutions for the advertising industry. I believe that before addressing the individual state of the art, so to speak, or solutions and positive examples, one must really formulate one thing again. In 2001, in no other industry, because you have categorized the scale again, in no other sector can we so easily positively influence this emission volume or drastically reduce it in a very short time. Why? Because advertising is certainly largely also permeated by certain inefficiencies, not because it is not exclusively powered by nature or green electricity, but because there is a lack of a kind of standardization. For example, for the various forms of advertising in certain environments, such as social media or regular websites, sustainability standards for apps have not yet been established. It is, for example, the end-of-life cycle of every app, of every advertising medium. Thousands are not predetermined, meaning some are parked for years and never used again, but can still cause power, consumption, and so on. At the very least, they consume storage space. The storage is thus used indirectly. This means There are many inefficiencies that we can relatively easily address in these various contexts within the advertising industry, among all these entities selling and buying advertising spaces, the targeting specialists, all of whom have such imbalances. And if we roughly estimate just correcting these imbalances could easily remove about 20 to 30% of the emissions volume from this industry. Please show me another industry, another sector where this can be implemented so easily. Additionally, now we come to the good examples that exist in the market. The IAB, Internet Advertising Bureau, has been actively working for years to advance standardization together with AdNet Zero. This is a global alliance of the largest brands and market participants that aims for net zero new emissions by 2050. Please correct me if I'm wrong, which also correlates well with the Green Deal here in Europe. And that is why there have already been many initiatives within the IAB. One is such an emissions calculator, which aims to standardize what we do as PYURE, for example, attention, not an advertising event, namely the calculation, the computation, and attribution of emissions volume from digital and also analog advertising in the future or linear TV, so that all market participants can orient themselves to these accounting standards. Additionally, there is a new tool that can at least optimize display, that is banner advertising materials and rich media advertising materials. And why the IAB does this is just my thesis, as I couldn't ask directly, is to support our intention, new burden technology and approach with the network, as well as our attribution and visualization of opportunities to reduce, methodically supported, and thus indirectly gives us a justification and says you are on the right track because you are methodically using what the majority of the market supports and has worked on. At the same time, we support that this is the right way to approach finding and eliminating efficiencies or inefficiencies in advertising materials, in supply paths, that is, supply chains of digital advertising. And so it extends across the various levers that you, just like us, also provide as optimization levers in the campaign context. These are the good examples. But the existence of a coalition like AdNet Zero with the largest advertisers and brands in the world who are actively working together to find standards in this direction is already a very good example. And they haven't just been around since yesterday. Similarly, it is a very good example. When one thinks about particularly sustainable advertising, that is, advertising that has already been optimized for emission reduction, for example, to market, that is, to brand it as a conscious or environmentally aware campaign, I consider a good incentive for any advertiser who is active in this area. And I believe that in the coming months and years, we will see much more movement. And I believe that we are doing ourselves a favor in Europe by maintaining this and pushing this momentum, despite rightward shift and despite attacks on the Green Deal. Because in the long run, this is a marathon. We will gain many advantages.
Stephan, do you have anything to add, or because you asked where the industry stands, maybe just very, very roughly? We know, Poisson will confirm this. So there is practically no company that is on the good side that does not work on data, on product carbon footprints. Many already have certain sustainability data out there through their holding companies simply because they are required to publish it. So something is definitely brewing. I would say that many companies in 2021 in the industry are preparing to provide significantly better, sometimes up-to-date sustainability data soon, and to offer formats and so on. So it's not that nothing is happening or anything like that. I would say that intensive work is being done behind the scenes because everyone actually assumes that it will definitely come. It has only become a bit quieter in front of the curtain, so to speak.
And would you say that the efforts come more from the established ones, that would be a bit like the example of net zero? Or are it rather the startups that bring some movement into the market? What is your assessment on that?
So this industry is always strongly driven by advertising, by the advertisers. So who ultimately pays for the advertising? And those are large companies. And if they say, we want all advertising to be somehow tinted blue, then it is very likely that there will soon be all blue advertising. And that's why this has always been a strong driver for this service industry. When the big players say, hello, you are scope 3 emissions for us, and we are under increasing pressure to reduce them because we have already done everything else, then the industry will start to provide increasingly better sustainable advertising. That is where the pressure must come from. Fortunately, these are often not just companies participating in AdNet Zero, but often simply self-reporting companies. So a German telecom company, for example, is a huge advertising client, is already obligated to report CSAD, and has an entire department that deals daily with the sustainability data of suppliers. So far, not so much with marketing expenses, I would say, without exact knowledge, simply because they have larger blocks as a company that lays a lot of cables and so on. But that will come. It is simply too obvious a block. So in marketing, media costs, at some point you will approach it when you say, we need to reduce it by another 3 percentage points. What about all these advertising expenses? Why are the emissions from this block so high?
This is a very important point. Marketing as a lever is currently not well identified, even within the framework, I believe, of materiality analyses. I haven't done or accompanied many of these with larger companies yet, but that this is a strong lever to significantly reduce one's scope 3 emissions that needs to come into awareness first. I believe we agree on the statement that most companies, regardless of their size in the holding structure and so on, are still very much focused on scope 1 and 2. How do they get the reporting in order? What exactly has the double materiality analysis revealed? Do I have the manpower to follow up on this? And so on. And that's why I believe it is very important and good that we are in this position with UBIRCH, with PYURE, and with some other market companions. We are already there and are increasingly integrating ourselves to become faster, more precise, and granular to adopt the latest attribution models. We are doing exactly the right thing in the right place and will be there when the realization, so to speak, has sunk in that marketing is a really good lever to reduce scope 3 emissions.
Mrs. Snar, you say so nicely, we are there and we have a solution ready. What does it look like? Which tools and solutions now? You and PYURE have specific joint cooperation and a common solution. Maybe you can tell us a bit about that. But perhaps you can also think of one or another tool or example that can already be used in 2021. Companies that don't want to wait until everyone is ready, but want to do something now to have an advantage in the future, because that also came out today. It makes sense to do sustainable advertising because sustainability should also be efficient and therefore more cost effective. On the other hand, there is also international and eventually political pressure, even if there is some uncertainty. What can I do as a tool or as a company, as an ad tech company, or also as an advertiser? Nowadays, what tools are available and what specifically do UBIRCH and PYURE have to offer? Maybe you can tell us a bit about that in the few minutes we have left.
I can start, Francois. And you can certainly share your perspective as well. So we thought USEND. UBIRCH is a specialist in presenting data, collecting supplier data, making data reportable, and all that. But we do not have specific expertise in delivery, which is so crucial in the advertising industry for optimizing campaigns and so on. But PYURE is very strong with their technology. And then we just thought, what should we bother the customers with? Yes, for that I needed a solution. And then you still have to talk to them and so on. And so we just plug it all together. And Now, I would say we are probably the only ones who have a CSRD compliant reporting front-end data storage system, so to speak, and an absolutely state-of-the-art optimization campaign delivery logic behind it. And we even synchronized it with the IAB-Calculator. So these are the three building blocks of our joint solution for 2021 that companies wanting to deliver according to the IB standard somehow have CSRD reportability, whether for their customers or for themselves, and want to deliver sustainable campaigns. They are best served with us.
Yes, I would sign that immediately. To conclude the topic, no, I would still introduce the high degree of automation. We already hinted at it. A major challenge is the increased organizational effort to acquire the data, meaning first onboarding solutions, and then ensuring the correctness of the data, and so on. Our integrated approach makes this, so to speak, at least partially obsolete for the area of marketing communication, simply because both the model and data aggregation are safe as they comply with the latest standards that we help shape. We are represented in all these committees with our technology partner Impact Plus from France, just like you, and other market competitors. Cosima briefly asked earlier about other solutions. So for many companies that are currently dealing with Scope 1 and Scope 2 emission levels, companies like Climate Partner, which has been active in the market since 2006, or a US player like Sedara, I believe are quite good solutions. There are also some others like Greenly from the UK. We with PYURE have taken a very special path. We solved the time to market problem by securing a European technology from Impact Plus for the local language area of DAC in order to help customers and agencies, meaning advertisers and agencies, as quickly as possible. Additionally, AdTax allows for complete transparency in their entire advertising chain, whether on the sales side, meaning I sell media, or on the buy side, meaning I purchase media as an agency or directly as an advertiser, enabling immediate transparency regarding the CO volume of specific individual campaigns or aggregated campaigns summarized in a report. And that is super accessible. We have a predefined nomenclature and a set of data points that we need, including the creatives, for example, which have an enormous influence, meaning the advertising materials, whether video or banner, it doesn't matter. And thus, we take many steps away from every customer who needs it, visualize it, and can directly hand it over directly to UBIRCH for the direct exchange of these information packages or product carbon footprints. And similarly, either as a supplier or it goes in both directions for you, if I have the system right in my mind. And that makes it so meaningful. It's almost a magnetic effect that arises from it. The more people join in, the easier and lower the hurdle for the requirements of follow-up work and additional data points. And I believe that makes our joint approach so meaningful. Nevertheless, in the overall context of sustainability and digital advertising, we are still at the beginning. There are many tests, I can say from our side, from PYURE's perspective. Many look into the systems, have the showcase presented to them, and are just starting with this so-called translation work into their own operational processes. 2001. What is most important to us is, however, always different from your solution. We are not only concerned with data collection, but for us, it is about active reduction. And that is what I find so amazing about our approach, which I find very fulfilling. Simply put, every project we implement aims to reduce the footprint of a campaign, whether by 0.5% or by 50 or 60%, while maintaining or improving campaign results. And that is exactly where we need to get to as a closing plea or closing statement. Here we are again at the beginning. We cross out this narrative of sustainability equals sacrifice in bold red, and write down sustainability equals profit. Because we have lower electricity costs, we have lower infrastructure costs, and in the best case, we also have a higher campaign effectiveness, meaning advertising impact through the increased efficiency of a campaign.
Yes, that was indeed a nice closing remark. However, I would still like to give you the opportunity to share your names and LinkedIn profiles, again, if you want to stay in touch. If there are any questions that arise in retrospect or perhaps even now, feel free to post them. 2001. And we are, of course, also present as companies on LinkedIn, where we welcome followers. Also, if there is interest in the next BirchTalk, which will take place next week, this time in a different industry on the topic of insurance. We are somewhat well positioned this year with our flight through the industries. Perhaps, Stephan and Francois, a little gimmick to conclude. A sentence for the listeners. What would you like to convey to them about the topic of climate responsibility instead of sustainability in the advertising industry? A little nugget. What do you find important as a collective that the listeners should take away today? One sentence each.
I would say it doesn't matter what you call it, just do something.
Sustainability and responsibility go hand in hand, but only with those who also do something for it. Therefore, it is not a topic that can be imposed on us, but one that we must shape ourselves. And the winners of tomorrow are those who have thought about sustainability and responsibility from the very beginning.
Great. Then I thank you and look forward to the next talk, and thank you for your time.